Hello, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the Custom Magic community, and I'm here to ask you a question. How do you feel about white collar crime? This is a constructed deck for custom standard, a custom Magic the Gathering format using custom sets and custom cards. And this is a deck that I'm about to submit to the Constructed League and see how it does. I've been playing it in non-league games, and it's been very enjoyable. It's a unique experience. It's something that I haven't played a deck like it before in real Magic, and I really enjoy that. That's something I like about custom standard is we have all these sets and cards that aren't really tested through R&D. They don't really get super broken, at least not as broken as they are lately, but there's a lot of fun things to explore and new decks that I don't think you would see in a normal format. And that, one reason for that is redundancy. Something that Wizards of the Coast R&D is good at, play design I should say, is they don't have a lot of redundant effects. They can see all of the sets coming out and they can be like, oh, we've already got Lightning Strike in this set. We don't need a second version of Lightning Strike in a following set. There have been times in Custom Standard where we've had like 3 or 4 of the same effect with different names, and this kind of critical mass of the same kind of card can lead to some weird decks. So there was a while, for example, when there were like 4 or 5 1-mana blue cantrips, and so I made this weird deck that cared about when you cast instants or sorceries, it would mill your opponent, and so I had all of these like opts and opt variants, and it was kind of a fun, silly deck. This is similar to that, although I think it is a lot less memey, although it's still kind of memey. I call it white collar crimes. Like, it can't be that serious of a deck. However, it's felt very powerful, and it's surprisingly resilient to a lot of different axes that your opponents will attack you on. Now, I mentioned redundancy and effects. And let's talk about that. Revitalize. That's a card in Magic. It's 2 mana. You gain 3 life, draw a card. When it first came out, I think it was played a little bit in the big Teferi control decks, but not a lot. I don't know for sure. It may not have actually seen any play, but I think it was one of those things that control decks might want to do at 2 mana sometimes, particularly because Teferi was untapping 2 lands at the end of their turn. But it's never really done that much. Now we have some variants of that. We have Public Broadcast, which was in Metropolis. It was in Custom Standard before Revitalize, but it's a Revitalized variant. It was definitely inspired by it. The thing is, you only get the card if you have more life than an opponent, which makes it kind of a fickle card. A lot of times, we evaluate cards thinking best case scenario, I'm going to gain 4 life and draw a card. I'll just cast these forever, have tons of life. But if you're behind and you draw this, oh great, I gain life, but I'm still behind enough I don't get the card, and it just feels real bad. But if you are already gaining lots of life through other effects, it's more likely that you're going to trigger superiority and get the card. And then another 2 mana instant speed white cantrip that we have is Water into Wine from Scriptures of Irshad. This does not gain you life, but what it does is it gives you a life doubling effect that will last your whole turn. So if you cast this and draw a card, you draw into a Revitalize, now that's gaining you 6 life. Or Public Broadcast could gain you 8 life, which definitely ensures you're going to be getting the card unless you're like literally about to lose. And so these 3 all work together to, kind of flow through your deck and gain a bunch of life, sometimes stupid amounts of life, depending on the amount of mana you have and what cards you draw as you cast these. And one thing about life gain is it's usually not worth a card, but when it's getting you cards back as you do so, that kind of changes the paradigm a bit. However, good decks usually don't spend 12 cards on life gain cards. They don't spend 12 slots on life gain cards, even if they're good life gain cards, even if those life gain cards work well together. And that's where we're going to get into how we're taking advantage of these. The first is Kalrum Divine Hand. This is a new threat from Custom Core 2020. It's a very powerful threat. It's essentially the same design as that 1-mana vampire that was in Real Magic a while ago, except it's white, it's legendary, it cares about gaining life, not your opponent losing life. The fact this can pump itself up and has really good attacks, has good synergies with the deck, and all that life you're gaining, if you're gaining that life on your turn, just to play this turn 1, turn 2 public broadcast, you're already turned your 1/2 into a 2/3, and you're going to be able to grow it from there on turn 3, holding up the activation. So this is a really powerful threat. It's a great thing to be able to play on turn 1. And then we have Demi's Disciple. Demi's Disciple is more of a prowess approach to the deck. This is where each time we cast one of these instant speed white cantrips, we get to untap, Disciple, and then, deal more damage at the end of their turn. And sometimes we're casting 3, 4, or 5 of these white cantrips, and that's 5 more damage for Demi's Disciple to deal to them. Very good in multiples as well, and it's a fantastic blocker. The 0/4 body cannot be... I cannot understate how great that has been. A lot of the removal in the format, at least the red-based removal, deals 3 damage. A lot of the black-based removal is, that -X/-X style of removal that scales with the mana you spend, or it only does -3/-3, which means these can do a great job of holding down the ground until you have enough mana you can be cycling through these stupid white instants. And I emphasize instants, because that is very important for the crime aspect of white collar crimes. The crime mechanic is a really cool resonant mechanic from Secrets of the River Cities. You commit crimes when you deal combat damage to an opponent, or when you cast a spell on their turn. Now here, Calvrum is very good at getting in and triggering crimes, but we don't have a lot of creatures, and certainly not aggressive creatures, right? We have Demi's Disciple, who's just there to block and, tap and untap a million times at the end of their turn. But into an empty board, like this will add up. This will attack as a 3/3 if they don't have anything to block it. And then on their turn, we're casting all this crap, dealing 2 damage to their face each time. Burn spells are really good when you draw a card as you're burning their face. They're also really good if you're also gaining life, which means that in against aggro decks, tempo decks, other burn decks, you're going to win. Like, they can't race you. And you're untapping Demi's Disciple. That's if, all the parts are in play, right? The thing is, in these A plus B style decks where you have, you want this in play and then you want to cast these spells, sometimes you end up with too many A's or too many B's. The thing is, these cantrips can help you find what you need and gain you life as you're building up to that, to set things up, help you survive long enough that you can set up your game-winning engine. And then the other creature here is Theos Artine. Come on, Theos, you're there. Who is it?
Me.
Yeah? Okay, but give me 10 minutes, all right?
Okay.
All right, I'll be right there. Go wait for me. Okay, you can stay there, but be quiet, okay? The last creature in this deck in White Collar Crime is Theos Artine from Metropolis. This guy also doubles your life gain. And so, like I was saying, redundant effects with water into wine, Theos Artine. He's pretty good after you play Calvrum to curve into Theos Artine. He doesn't present much of a threat on his own. But if you cast Calvrum, Theos Artine, you activate on turn 3. By this point, you should have 22 life. They should be at 19. This will deal another 4. They'll be at 15. And you'll be at 25. Is that correct? Yeah, 15 to 25. No. You'll be gaining 8 off of this. It'll be 15 to 30. So you will have activated this clause of Theos Artine of having twice the life total of an opponent. So on turn 3, this will be a 5/5 lifelink, which is, it's very difficult to ever get this to happen, but it can happen sometimes. And if you're facing an aggressive deck, you already have an advantage, and this just multiplies that advantage. If you have this in play and you start cycling through Revitalize variants, I mean, you're in good shape. Even if you don't ever double their life total, it's a very dangerous card. This is also a very scary card for other players a lot of times, even if I don't think it's going to do that much for me as I cast it. It's a real removal magnet when they should be removing stuff like Calrem or whatever. But this is kind of a flex spot, and I've been surprisingly pleased with how often I'm actually able to trigger that. Okay, so we looked at the main 3 instants, but obviously, those main 3, spoilers, we need to be committing lots of crimes and casting lots of instants and sorceries, so we have filled out our suite with some other effects, such as Inhibit, which is another spell that gains life in white, but it doesn't draw you a card, which is unfortunate, but it's not the kind of effect other decks are really prepared for when facing a red-white deck. They don't think their stuff is going to get countered, and to be fair, technically it's not getting countered, it's just being bounced back to their hand as you gain more life, which can put the game out of hand. The issue is if your life total is super ahead of theirs, but your card advantage is way below theirs, like the life total doesn't matter. So there's some real risk in this choice. It's used mostly as like a protection thing because we don't really win the game without some combination of Cartel Muscle and Demi's Disciple and Calvarum. And if they're a deck that just removes all our stuff, sometimes you want to be spending inhibits just to protect your Cartel Muscle for one more turn, so that then you can spend the next turn going off and finishing off the last bits of their life total. 3 might be much here, but I've put it as 3 right now so I can make sure I play it enough that I can correctly evaluate how good it is. I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up tossing it, but we'll see. I talked about the card advantage issue that this deck faces, particularly against control. That led to me removing some of the really low to the ground aggressive prowessy aggro creatures towards something more like Rosalind's Choice here. Ignore the bullet points being off. That's going to be fixed in a soon to be coming version of the custom box. But the real mode you care about here is exiling the top 2 cards of your library. You don't have to play them that turn. You can cast them or play them until the end of your next turn. That play wording is very important because that means if you flip lands, you can actually play those lands. If it said cast, you couldn't. And a lot of times what we are looking for are those lands so that we can hit 4 mana in particular and cycle Water into Wine and Revitalize in the same turn. And, gain 6 life and cycle 2 cards. Occasionally creatures you don't control attack this turn if able. Yeah, occasionally you'll use this to fish their blockers into your face, which you don't care so much about when your life totals in the 30s, to allow you to get in with Calrem and you just pump him up and destroy him. And then the last thing in our instant suite is Violent Discharge, and this can be used as removal. All of these other things cost 2 mana, and it's nice to mix it up with something that costs 1. I'm a little tempted to, if I remove Inhibit, I want to see if there's some 1 mana instant speed cantrip in red or white that I can throw in here to help trigger Violent Discharge's crime requirement to get it down to 1 mana instead of 3. This is good for removal, but also just for finishing your opponent off after you've done enough triggers. The other thing with Inhibit that I forgot to mention is when you're at the point where you've got Cartel Muscle and or Demi's Disciple up, and you just care about the number of spells you can cast, you can use Inhibit to, you cast a spell, you untap your stuff, you deal crime damage, you return the spell, and then you get to all those prowess triggers once more. And I used that in a recent game to finish somebody off before they could start to stabilize. Oh, and then the last thing is Amaret, Hope of Night. Amazing, super amazing card, great at stabilization, also has reach. You can just play this for 4 mana, deal 4 to their face, and gain 4 life or 8 life. And by the way, that stacks. If you have Theos Artine and cast Water into Wine, your public broadcast gains you 16 life. This can also just win games on its own, which is important in this deck where, you know, if they can just remove your creatures, sometimes that's just the end of the game for you. But an Amulet can get there eventually. Amulet's just a great stabilizing card. Mana base, we have 3 good enemy duels at this point. So Imperial Barracks is one of the show lands. You need a mountain or plains. We've got those, but we also have Zephyr Peak, which is a mountain plains. This is a slow land where you need to have played some other lands first, but that's okay. And we have Clifftop Retreat, which, you know, is just one of those well-known buddy lands. Solid land to make sure that we hit all of the mana that we want to. I've been very pleased with the mana base. It's a very good, consistent 2-color mana base. Sometimes I have a hard time casting Cloud Realm on turn 1. We only have 9 lands that allow us to do that. 5 plains, 4 Imperial Barracks. So I'm considering bumping up the plains count, lowering the mountain count for that. Sideboard, Grin's Reaver and Embers of Prophecy were concessions to control matchups or decks that have lots of removal. Embers of Prophecy is just something where you can tap your lands to get cards. Grin's Reaver being something that gives you some card advantage as it attacks, but you have to be able to cast the things that turn, and sometimes you don't really want to cast what they have, so I haven't tested this much. It's just kind of an idea. Imperial Claim, a good flexible sideboard slot against artifact or enchantment-based decks. And then Shock is good against aggro decks and tempo decks. Wander the Unknown if we need to become more of a controlling deck and we really need to remove their threats. So that has been White Collar Crime. I'm about to enter it into a league, and we're going to see how it does, hopefully better than the last league. At the very least, it's a fun deck to play, and I'll have the list below the video, and I hope you guys enjoy. I'll talk to you guys next time.